a geek. Talking baseball every week. 'Cause they're Gleeman and the Geek.
And welcome to Gleeman and the Geek, presented by Black Stack Brewing, family owned and operated, and now in a liquor store near you. My name is John Bonus. I'm of Twins Daily. With me is Aaron Gleeman. He is of The Athletic.
I'm going to start making you list all your other websites. Like on a lot of shows, John will joke that I'm New York Times. But I'm going to start as a payback for that, I'm going to start making John list. He just listed them to me.
I think those other websites would consider that slander and come after me because I'm not nearly as involved in those websites.
The New York Times considers it slander when you say I work for the New York Times.
Well, that's probably
as they
true.
should.
That's probably true.
There are still no moves of note for the Twins, although they did add someone to the roster who we're going to talk about. Rule 5 pick, Eiberson Castellano.
Yes.
Which is a great name.
Unbelievably
When I
good name.
first heard it announced, I was watching the Rule 5 draft on a live stream, which is a low point of my life, certainly. I'll admit that, to watch the Rule 5 draft. It's been a low point to attend Rule 5 drafts in the past. To watch it on a live stream is a whole nother level.
I think they're still trying to make up for the Borg Schulte thing. Like they're just trying to get as many good names and they're not upset that what is they get.
But I thought they said Iverson, and I was like, that's a sweet name.
Iverson from
Philly. I was like, that's a great name.
Yeah.
Well, there was, I'm already off course, but there's a show called Succession, or there was.
Yeah, I remember.
Great show. And
terrible show.
Yeah, you haven't seen it.
I have seen it. I watched that first half of the season. I couldn't stand it.
Oh, wow.
Chrissy loved it, though. She watched it to the end.
One of the main characters, his son is named Iverson because they're from Philadelphia.
Oh, really?
That's a good name.
That's awesome.
No, his name's Eiberson. Which is in itself not a bad name.
No, it's a good name.
And we'll talk more about him beyond
he's an interesting pickup for the Rule 5 draft, for that matter.
I haven't looked at it. I just focus on the name, really. I've been talking about his name for the last 7 days. But so we'll talk about that in terms of, free agent signings, which I've heard teams are allowed to do at this point, or trades. I think maybe even a couple teams are doing that. The Twins, not unexpectedly, but the Twins are perhaps disappointingly absent from all
kind of quiet. Yeah. No irons in the fire was the last update I heard prior to the winter meetings.
Yeah.
So
but we do have a lot to talk about on a more speculative front. Two main topics, I would say. One, which we had Dan Hayes, also of The Athletic, on, what was that, Friday? When did we have him on? Thursday?
Wednesday.
Sure.
Tuesday or Wednesday last
week.
Yeah.
And
Wednesday. He was the same day the Rule 5.
Correct. Yeah, he was at the winter meetings talking to us, and we talked a lot with him about the Correa speculation that has been swirling, among other things. But we'll talk about that kind of from our perspective. But if you want like more behind the scenes kind of nuts and bolts of it from his more reporting perspective, and he talked to Falvey, he talked to Baldelli, he talked to fill in the blank behind the scenes about that. We did, it was an hour and a half, but it was probably 45 minutes of Correa talk with Dan on the Patreon side. And I even managed to not be mean to Dan this time, which is a miracle in and of itself. So worth listening to that.
We kept it goofy enough that you couldn't get mean.
Yeah, that's right. Those are really my two avenues for anything, goofy or mean.
This is why I like to throw you lots of tangents.
Yeah. I'd like to see you try to avoid that with the way my brain works. So we'll talk about that. But first, I wanted to talk about the other headline, even bigger headline grabbing thing, which is that the Ishbia brothers, Mat Ishbia and Justin Ishbia, Dan reported this. Also, it was also reported in Bloomberg. That they are interested, specifically Justin, but they are interested in buying the Minnesota Twins, and in fact have, begun to pursue that in a meaningful way. There's no offer that's been made. There's no paperwork that's been signed, but they're certainly involved.
They are circling each other.
Right. I think a lot of it, as we've talked about, when the Pohlads first put the team up for sale publicly in October, I guess, this isn't going to be a quick process.
Sure.
A $2 billion thing, particularly when there's thousands of employees and there's a ballpark and there's all sorts of red tape involved from a league standpoint. This isn't a thing that you call up on a Tuesday and by Sunday you're, signing the paperwork.
Right.
This is a 6-month or 12-month process. it's been now, 2+ months since then. And so I think kind of realistically, this fits maybe what we expected, which is a couple months from now, maybe you start to hear so-and-so's interested, this person's interested, this group is interested, whatever. In terms of where it goes from here, who knows? We're going to talk about the Ishbias because they're the only publicly known or reported on people who have expressed interest. I don't know that others haven't, but they're also just real interesting.
Right, yeah, that's right.
In general, but also to start thinking about, if you're a Twins fan, the differeces between them and the Pohlads is, in my mind, immense. So we'll get into that as kind of a, dream casting maybe for Twins fans, but I do think it's interesting. So that's what we got for this show. It's as interesting a set of topics as you will ever get for a team that hasn't done Jack S.
and is not expected
to do Jack S.
Right.
So yeah, that's what we got. So, and it's also worth noting that other than the Twins, and there are a handful of other teams who have also not done much, but in general, it's been incredibly busy first 2 months of the offseason.
Crazy.
I mean, one of the busier ones in terms of volume, quality, quantity, whatever.
So many of the top free agents have kind of jumped off the board.
15 of the top 40, as ranked by The Athletic, are off the board, including 4 of the top 6.
And that's rare for this early in December.
I mean, you saw Soto got damn near $800 million, which in and of itself is big. There's been some big trades. Cleveland just traded Jimenez, which is big. So yeah, there's a lot of stuff going on, just not with the Twins. But let's talk a little bit about Mat and Justin Ishbia, who are a couple of nice Jewish boys, as my mom would say, from suburbs of Detroit.
Yep.
And
they're Midwesterners.
Sure. They both went to Michigan State. Mat, who is the younger brother, played basketball at Michigan State as a walk-on and actually won a championship with the Mateen Cleaves and who am I thinking of? Peterson? Morris Peterson. Right. Tom Izzo coached team in 2000. And I've been reading up on these boys. Men, excuse me. If you got $1 billion, I'll call you a man. And it's interesting because Justin, who's the one specifically being linked to the Twins, but I think they kind of come as a duo just because they're so rich.
Kind of, but it sounds like in the Sun situation, Mat is the majority owner, and
Justin owns almost a quarter of the team.
Is that what it is?
22%.
Yeah, that's what I was wondering. I was wondering what the percentage was of it. So
my assumption, and Dan actually reported something, Dan Hayes reported something along these lines, along with Sam Amick, who's one of our better national NBA writers, and Dennis Lin, who's our San Diego Padre. They had a triple byline, which is always fun to see. Reported basically, that they both own the Suns, but Mat, who is the younger brother who played basketball at Michigan State, is the majority owner, the controlling owner, however you want to phrase it, and Justin owns 20 to 25% of it. My sense is that it would be the opposite for the Twins. Justin would be the majority / controlling owner, which is to say he would be the face and the primary investment from the ownership side, but Mat, his brother, would probably own 20%. Because
that's interesting. Because a lot of times with minority owners, they own much smaller percentage than the 20%.
Yeah, that's just a speculative number based on the Suns.
Sure, right. Yeah, right. That's right. But it's interesting that is the way for the Suns because, like I said, you'll often hear especially if you are purchasing a team in a city other than where you are from or a state other than where you are from, they will reach out to other people to become minority owners. And what that really is you just kind of want them on your team, on your business team. It isn't so much the money that you're interested in or the percentage. It's that you have some sort of relationship with the community that you're buying.
Sure, which if they buy the Twins, I will bet there will be some minority owners from Minnesota. They're already talking to us.
They're definitely talking to some. We know some.
Right? It's a different situation, I think, in an interesting situation where it's not often that a guy is interested in buying something for $2 billion and his brother, who he's extremely close with, has as much or more money and is also interested in it.
That's right.
So it's it takes away some of the need for minority ownership when you can just be my brother will kick in $500 million.
And the amount of money that we're talking about is crazy. It's not together they are totally worth $3 billion and can afford this thing. It is
net worth.
Each of them have a net worth, according to Forbes, greater than that of the Pohlad family.
Yeah. So basically, Justin, who's the older brother, and the minority owner of the Suns. We need a way to like differentiate them. But anyway, if you saw them
by their names, Justin and Matt.
No, but it's like one's got a beard, one doesn't.
Well, let's lay it out. Justin is the minority owner.
He's got a net worth of roughly $5.5 billion with a B.
He's the older brother. He's got a net worth of $5 billion, and he's the minority owner in the Suns.
And like you said, $5.5 billion is roughly the estimated net worth of the entire Pohlad family.
Right, that's right.
And that's a lot of money. But one guy who has as much as all of them is noteworthy. And then the real noteworthy part is Matt, the younger brother who played basketball at Michigan State and is the majority owner of the Suns, has a net worth of like $15.5 billion. So he's worth more than the Pohlad family and his brother combined plus $5 billion, basically. Yeah. That's a lot of money. I mean, together, if they were to buy the Twins, they would be the second richest owners in baseball behind Steve Cohen in terms of net worth of the Mets. Okay. And we see kind of, it's like, this is going to sound absurd, but having $1 billion is like an unthinkable amount of money to a normal person.
Right.
Or even a very rich person. Having like $3 billion sets you up, at a higher level than them because you can buy something for $500 million and it doesn't take up half. Right. Having $5 billion and having a brother who you're close with who has $15 billion and they have all kinds of business. And by the way, the Suns themselves are worth like $2 billion. Okay. They're also Mercury, WNBA team. They're also partial owners of the Nashville Sounds, which is the MLS team. Right. Like, I don't think it's a stretch to say they probably have a net worth. They could get to $25 billion in terms of like capital if they wanted to.
I mean, I assume the $15 billion and the $5 billion are including the
I just mean their ability to generate capital. Well, basically, because they're also their father was a private equity guy. That's how they got into this. All I'm saying is like that's another level of billionaire even. Right. And we see with Steve Cohen now. Steve Cohen has twice as much money as both of them combined. So he's at another level entirely. Right. He's also a hardcore, lifelong Mets fan. And we've seen what that has led to, which is he doesn't give a crap. Right. He wants the Mets to be good. The money means nothing to him. He wants to sit at a Mets game and watch a World Series, basically. Right. So we see he spends $800 million on Juan Soto. I'm not naive enough to think that the Ishbias, with a team that they are not passionate about. I mean, I'm sure they would become passionate about, but they're from Detroit. They're Tigers fans. Right. Justin, who's the primary interest here in buying the Twins, works in Chicago. There's also, interestingly, there were some rumors recently that he was trying to buy the White Sox because
interesting.
Reinsdorf, who's owned the White Sox forever and is a million years old, had put out some feelers potentially, I think probably in response to how bad they were this season and people calling for him to sell the team and stuff of like, well, maybe I will sell the team. In which case I think Justin Ishbia probably said, all right, here I am. Right. I work in Chicago. I'm one of the richest people here. And apparently that didn't go anywhere or Reinsdorf decided he's not ready to begin that process yet. And I think maybe there was a pivot from that. Maybe you talk yourself into, I'm going to buy the White Sox. You realize that path is not open yet. Right. And then you go, all right, what other team can I buy? Right. The nice thing, though, is Arizona has a team where the brother, they own the Suns. Yep. You ain't going to move the Twins to Arizona. And Detroit has a team.
That's right.
So you ain't going to move and Chicago's got two teams. So
if you were talking about non-local ownership, the second best thing to non-local ownership is a non-local ownership, or the second best thing to local ownership is non-local ownership that is in a city or from an area that already can't.
You don't want a rich guy from Nashville or Portland, basically.
Although Justin did go to law school in Nashville and is associated with Vanderbilt, and has given a lot of money to Vanderbilt. But
that'd be a hell of a thing. So let's talk a little bit here. So what's interesting to me is, in addition to just a level of wealth that, if they own the team, and by the way, based on how they've run the Suns, now they've only owned the Suns for like a year and a half, but and I'm not going to say
which is the honeymoon period for both sides.
Sure,
I mean the Pohlads were in the honeymoon period for the first few years of the Twins.
Okay,
well they were.
There's a honeymoon period of like going to a Motel 6 and buying the nicest room at a Motel 6, and there's a honeymoon period of what they've done with the Suns. And I'm not even saying they've run the Suns well, but they've put an incredible amount of money into the Suns, both in terms of the roster. I mean, like days after buying the team, they did a trade for Kevin Durant. Right. And then they did a trade for Bradley Beal. And then I believe their payroll is going to be second to the Warriors in the NBA because they're so far above the luxury tax cutoff. Yeah. So they're ending up paying like a double payroll, which is hundreds of millions of dollars over the kind of the normal cap of a payroll. Well, that in and of itself, along with the aggression they showed going out and getting Durant, regardless of whether those were sound decisions long term, because they gave up a bunch of draft picks and all this stuff. That's another topic.
At the very least, they were aggressive.
Extremely aggressive with both their moves and their money.
Right.
And here's the thing about the NBA versus MLB. There's no salary cap, and you can't trade draft picks. Right. So the criticisms maybe of how they've run the Suns, because the Suns, as we saw, the Wolves knocked them out of the playoffs in a sweep last year, and they're not looking that much better this year. They've been injured because Durant's old, but the things that kind of hamstring you,
that's right.
When you make bold, expensive moves in the NBA, is the loss of draft picks, which closes your future avenues to do things, and then the kind of salary cap implications, which if you're spending at a level that they're spending at, you essentially have no avenues to bring in more players. You're just sort of set with what you have. Well,
it's a much tighter CBA in terms of luxury tax and the penalties and so on associated with violating the luxury tax.
And so those things make what they've done with the Suns kind of a mixed bag in terms of is it good or bad. But those same kind of principles or goals or
limitations, borders, boundaries.
They don't exist in MLB.
I mean, they exist to a smaller extent on the financial side, and they exist not at all in the draft picks.
Right. And so if you were to come in and buy the Minnesota Twins and do essentially the same methodology that they've done with the Suns, which is let's immediately make big splashes, let's add an extreme amount to the payroll, and let's trade future for present, which would be prospects for present. And I'm not saying that doesn't have an impact in the future, but that would have an incredible impact on a Major League Baseball team, so far beyond what it would have on an NBA team. Because we've seen it. like that's essentially what separates baseball's big spenders from big spenders in other sports, Mets, Yankees, Red Sox, on Dodgers obviously, is that there's really no punishment. There's no long-term ramifications. There are, but they're not meaningful in the same way that they are in NBA. And so that's why this as a notion even, just to dream on, is so potentially exciting.
Right, of course.
Which is, these are rich guys even in a world of rich guys. These are guys who are clearly huge sports fans, played sports, bought sports teams, Justin
won championships,
But they've invested heavily immediately after buying teams. They've also, I read, they upgraded the practice facility with the Suns, and they did other things that cost over $100 million.
They also, we would get to the television thing in the next segment.
Made free television for the Suns because they were frustrated with the television situation, all that. If you were to just come in and do even half that aggression or willingness to spend with the Twins, the impact on a lower third spending Major League Baseball team with that sort of approach, I mean, it would be night and day from the Pohlads. And I don't, there's nothing guaranteeing that they wouldn't buy the Twins and treat it like a business, but I would say that everything they've done so far suggests they wouldn't, treat it quote unquote like a business, and that's exciting. I think now. We can go through, how they made their money and what they do, and I've heard from people.
They also didn't change the GM when they bought the Suns. They
changed the coach, though.
They changed the coach.
They hired a coach
when they trade for Durant literally 72 hours later.
They hired a coach, Frank Vogel, for like 5 years, $30 million, and then fired him after the first or second year, being last year when they got swept by the Wolves, and they fired him. And I remember I watched an interview where they explained it, and he was like, he's a great coach, just not a fit for us. And somebody was like, well, it's not it's not common for a team to fire a guy a year into a 5-year, $30 million deal. And he goes, well, I'd rather do that than pay the guy $30 million to be the coach that we don't want. even that attitude is like something that you would never see,
of course,
from the Pohlad family. So that it's exciting. Before we get into maybe I don't know some less enthusiasm generating details about these guys, which is only fair. Let's talk about our first couple of sponsors here. Let's try to make our billions here.
Yeah, that's right. Started with our presenting sponsor, Black Stack Brewing. I spent a night at Black Stack. I know you're shocked to hear this. Spent a night at Black Stack Brewing recently.
Spend the night? You slept over?
Just about, damn it.
Yeah, I believe it. Under the bar?
I got to tell you, what a great organization. You know, I think I started the thing by talking about how they're family owned and operated. I mean, it's just so very clear what they're doing. I would encourage you to stop by their tap room and experience what they have put together there. See if you can just get to know the people that they work there. There's clearly they have a very family-ish feel between the. It was started by a family, and it feels like they treat the people, and a lot of the friends of the family are working there. It feels like a family. It's very cool.
Uncle John's there now.
Uncle John has stopped by. And sometimes you'll see Uncle Phil stop by with me. But also now you can also experience them right out of your liquor store because they've expanded to the point where it's interesting. One of the I don't know if this is on the record or off the record with them, but they don't want to expand that much. Like they're not trying to. They're
not trying to become Samuel Adams.
They're not trying to be, or even Summit or something. They're trying to basically be a really good craft beer place that has enough distribution to just sort of allow them to exist for 40 or 80 years.
They've started to get wider distribution around the Twin Cities, and even further than that.
And then I took a case of beer of them from home and for our Christmas cookie party. I cannot tell you, we went through more beer in that Christmas cookie party than we've ever gone through in a John Bonus party, and that's saying something.
Yeah, wow.
Because people really like that beer.
The police have come to several John Bonus.
I will highly recommend this local 755 New England IPA. It was so good. And they have a double dry hopped one at their tap room, which is even better.
All right.
Slopes French down. Pilsner, Pull Tabs Pale Ale, Uncut Jams. They've got a strawberry rhubarb sour that Chrissy loves.
The tap room is 94 and 280, basically. Check them out. Right. Or if you just want to go pick it up at your local
look for the
liquor store, or if you want to see where can I pick them up, go to the Black Stack website, and there's a where are we available page that you can see.
A distinctive silver and black cans with some colors on them. You'll find them. You'll recognize what you do.
Our next sponsor is Storyworth, which is relevant this time of year, especially because it's a great gift in general, as we'll tell you about in a second. Right. But it's a particularly great gift, I think, for our audience, because if our audience is anything like me, they forget into the last minute to buy people gifts for things. And then you look at the calendar and you go, oh my God, I have 7 days to buy a gift. What can I get that will get here in 7 days?
Yes.
Storyworth. Because it can get there immediately. Here's how Storyworth.
A week and 8 days till Christmas. Yeah. 8 days till Christmas.
Irrelevant because Storyworth can be delivered immediately.
Yeah.
Because here's how it works: you sign somebody, a beloved family member or friend, up for Storyworth, or a hated one. It works for them too.
Sure.
And the process will start. So they'll get
just make it an interesting one.
Sure.
Because you're going to learn a lot about them
via email, and Storyworth will throughout the entire year ask them questions about their life.
That's right. They basically send them an email, and they get a thought-provoking question.
And you can see that as it's being answered, but the real kind of payoff is they're basically building an autobiography of this person.
Right.
And it's almost like kind of secretly doing it. Maybe they're giving information and telling stories they wouldn't normally tell. And at the end of the year, and here's a little hint, this can be itself a present for the second year.
That's right.
You can get a printed book of this.
That's right. All those stories and photos in a keepsake hardcover book that you'll be able to share.
John has used it for family members, and you can too. With Storyworth, you're giving those you love most a thoughtful, personalized gift from the heart and preserving their memories and stories for years to come. Go to storyworth.com/Gleeman, and you can save $10 off your first purchase. That's Storyworth. StoryWorth, storyworth.com/Gleeman to save $10.
Both of my parents did that. I'm so glad they did while they were still around. So
okay, so let's get back to these Ishbia men.
Guys, how about that? They seem like guys.
Bros. The Ishbia bros. That's really they are. So
there you go.
I read one thing. They're both, like I said, very big sports fan. They both played sports, obviously. He's constantly at. They're both constantly at games. I saw that together they've donated something like $30 or $40 million to the Michigan State athletics program for basketball and baseball specifically. Okay. They essentially just rebuilt the base because baseball's low rent and compared to basketball and football in college. Yes. And then, like you said, Justin donated, I think, $10 million to the Vanderbilt Law School. And beyond that, though, we have a writer at The Athletic who covers college sports named Brian Hamilton, who does a really good job. And he had written something about their donation to Michigan State, last year maybe, or even 6 months ago, something. And in that article, he talked to Justin Ishbia, and they were kind of emphasizing, I forget what percentage of the donation went to baseball, but it was significant for the baseball program, which a lot of baseball programs, including the Gophers, are in rough shape financially. And I'm going to read you a quote. So the sense was
he waxed poetic about baseball,
right?
A little
because
bit,
Matt played college basketball. He owns a basketball team, all that stuff. Justin grew up playing baseball. Probably hoped to play college baseball, wasn't good enough. He even made a joke about that. But he told Brian Hamilton in this article that he has gone to, I forget the number, but like 40 consecutive Tigers opening days, home openers, with his father. Started as. That in and of itself makes you a baseball fan. And then I'm going to read you a couple quotes that he had in this article. Let's see. Billionaire, 45 straight opening days for the Tigers with his father. The two of them recently finished a tour of every Major League stadium complete with what Ishbia calls a, quote, nerdy ranking system of seats, hot dogs, and more. Baseball, the sport, has been as consequential as it gets for him. By the way, keep in mind, this was written before the notion of them buying a team. Right. It's not like they were trying to dig into baseball information. Right. And then here's the quote that I think stood out to me. This is from Justin Ishbia to The Athletic. Quote, "The beauty of baseball is that it's not about a star or two. It's truly a team sport, and it's a team sport over a long period of time. It's a grind, and it's a discipline. It's life. Life is the discipline of doing the same thing over and over again consistently, and that's what the long summer of baseball is all about." That quote, said less poetically, could have come out of either of our mouths on any number of shows.
Whose else mouth that could come out of? Said more poetic or about as poetically?
Yeah.
Falvey.
Okay.
This is exactly what the Twins, what Falvey preached over and over and over 2, 3, 4, 5 spring trainings ago when they first coming in. The process over results kind of piece, the grind, the discipline. You keep doing the same thing. This is how you're going to build velocity. Like that could have been a quote directly from the general manager of the Twins, or the CBO of the Twins, president now of the Twins. All right, I have trouble keeping up with the title inflation over there.
Well, he won't officially become president until January,
okay. But yeah. 4 or 5 years ago, as he was trying to shape the culture of the organization and shape the culture of the minor leagues in particular and development process.
Yes. So I'm not saying giving a quote like that makes you bulletproof. No, it doesn't make you the Pope or anything like that. But it's
interesting.
That's the quote of a real baseball fan, in my opinion. And so also reading some of these profiles, it's really funny to read. I'm not someone who reads stuff like the Wall Street Journal or Forbes or stuff like that or Bloomberg, but I've been reading up on these guys over the past couple of days and reading some long form pieces about both of them. And it's fascinating to see the similarities, but also how dissimilar the ways these guys are written about in financial, publications versus how they would be written about in sports publications.
Right.
Because it's much more like detailed about how they made their money, which we're going to get into because I think it's interesting. But the common theme that I would say, and this is not like direct quotes from Justin, but a lot of the profiles of one or both of them has sort of mentioned this, which is he's the older brother and he's unfathomably rich,
right,
and successful and well known, but his little brother is all that and more.
Right.
He's got 3 times as much money. He's got the Phoenix Suns. He followed him to Michigan State and then became the celebrity at Michigan State as a walk-on who played on a championship team. There was even a quote who said from one of their friends who was like, yeah, for the first year at Michigan State, Matt was Justin's brother. And then after that, Justin was Matt's brother, basically.
That's right.
And so I wonder, now that they've owned the Suns for a year plus and they're both involved, and he's probably seeing how enjoyable that's been and sort of the celebrity that comes with that.
Well, and they certainly understand the business aspects and how the appreciation game works and that sort of thing.
But I really wonder if there's and they seem very close, so I'm not suggesting that there's some weird rivalry or something like that. But I really wonder if it was the older brother seeing all this stuff and saying, I think it's my time now to buy a team.
Yeah.
And he's directing his interest towards the sport he loves,
right? Yeah,
where his brother directed towards basketball, and to me, that's fine with me. Whatever gets you there and gets you buying a team that you feel an emotional attachment to, because look, he's a Tigers fan and he lives in Chicago. Right. I'm sure if you would have put a truth serum, he ain't the biggest Twins fan in the world.
Probably,
but if he's an incredible baseball fan, who it seems to me is our type of baseball fan. Like an actual, interested in the things that make the game unique and frustrating and interesting and all that stuff. That tells me there's a chance that he can become not just financially invested in the Twins, but sort of view it as
emotionally
the culmination of something that he's been going to 4 decades worth of opening days.
Right.
Although it will be interesting if he were to own the Twins and then they're playing the Tigers or something. Who do you even root for?
I got to also say, the fact that, A, he's the brother of somebody who's done this, and B, as a minority owner, he's sort of gone through the process.
Right.
He knows what he's getting into. And I mean that both from, the running a professional franchise aspect, right? Which is, you get into a business, it's not, especially you buy a business that you haven't done before, you get into it, you are just taking in as, you're just drinking from a fire hose, because you are trying to learn as much as you can about that business and what's working and what's not working, and figure things out as fast as you can. And it sounds like, right?
With the Suns, but also just in general, they're pretty hands-on,
right?
At least initially.
Right. Okay, so that's one part. The second is that the process itself of buying a sports team is incredibly complicated, and complicated to the point of you're going to get an audit right up your hoo-ha. Right. I mean, it is going to be...
What's that? That was a technical term? Medical hoo-ha? Is that what you just said?
That's what they said. They have gone through... One of the more encouraging aspects about them expressing an interest is that, unlike... it's not uncommon that you'll have somebody with a lot of money saying, hey, I'm going to buy something, right? But they've already been through the audit process with another professional sports league. They've already been through it with the NBA.
Their finances have been cleared.
Their finances have been cleared. Their personal lives have been cleared. Their attitudes have been cleared. They've already been accepted by a group of 30 similar people that are to the Major League Baseball owners, and is, not just. And the fact that Justin is leading it instead of Matt leading it is probably different. There's going to be a different level of audit that goes on this particular case. But he was not a small owner to begin with. He was a 20% plus owner. He went through a lot of this stuff. And so if you are looking if they can kind of go through all the steps of agreeing on a price and figuring out how it's going to work or something, you would think that, which is often the most difficult part, and which also, if there are competing bids, can become the tipping point as to which side ends up getting it versus the other guy. Major League Baseball isn't afraid, or a league is not afraid to throw its weight around and say, I'm going to choose this one over that one, despite the fact that this one had a higher price.
It's not dissimilar necessarily to trying to buy a house. I've personally attempted to buy a house, a condo, in years past, and not been outbid from a total value standpoint, but been outbid because somebody just said, I'll pay cash for it. Or, whatever it is. Or I'll do a 10-day turnaround.
Yeah,
there are details that can differentiate bids that are beyond money, especially at this level, where it's what's $100 million?
Well, and I mean, what the league wants is somebody that's not going to cause trouble. We saw that a little bit. I'm talking about how the fact that he was already vetted by the NBA. It matters that he was also vetted by the NBA in 2023, because we know that Mark Cuban expressed an interest in buying a Major League Baseball team, and immediately the rest of the owners were like,
he tried to buy the Pirates and the Cubs supposedly years back.
Right. And in both cases, Major League Baseball's ownership were like, we would discourage you from attempting that.
Since then, Matt almost got into a fist fight at courtside with Nikola Jokic.
That is true.
So, whatever. But also, I think leagues are, especially now, given the level of money and the explosion of money coming in, going out, franchise valuations and all that, they're looking for people for whom a downturn of 3 years won't affect them.
Right.
And there are some, like I know in the NHL, there are still some like older school, like pre-billionaire rich guys who are like, oh, we can't spend because like my net worth is $600 million. They don't want those guys. They want the guys who it's a rounding error for them to spend $200 million on the payroll and all that. And I think these guys probably fit the description.
Right.
Let's talk for a minute about how they made their money.
Okay.
Because this is something that I've heard from a lot of people where it's like, yeah, I'm excited about the potential of a couple of rich, brothers who love sports coming in and being aggressive with the Twins, as we just talked about. But, there are some red flags here. Here's what I said, and then we can get into it. My thought is, well, first of all, I asked around to some NBA side people about this, and I said, "Are these good guys? Like, what? How are they?"
Right.
And the thing I heard from multiple people was, if you judge them on the scale of billionaires, they're good guys.
Okay, all right.
And I get what they're trying to say there, which is like, are they Mother Teresa? No. Are they working at a soup kitchen? No.
Sure.
Are they, do they have a foster family and they're, no. But the problem with, if you're a sports fan and you're a Twins fan and you would like someone else to own the team other than the Pohlads, I think we're all kind of on the same page as that at this point. I don't know if I've ever talked about that, but I'm on that page.
Yeah, okay.
If you're waiting around,
you're the contrarian on that. Yeah.
If you're
always playing the contrarian.
If you're waiting around for a multi-billionaire, because it's not going to just take a billionaire. It has to be a multi-billionaire person or group to be interested in buying a sports franchise. And one of your requirements as a fan to feel positive about that is that they are either, quote unquote, good people and or made their money and their businesses even now are quote unquote good. If you're waiting for that, a multi-billionaire, someone with $5, $10, $20 billion and an extreme interest in buying a franchise for $1.52 billion, and you also want them to be quote unquote good, you're going to be waiting a very, very long time. The number of people for whom all those boxes get checked in the eyes of the public, and obviously it's subjective. We can get into some of that too. I'm not saying these guys are not good people, by the way. Right. But I'm saying go look up how Carl Pohlad made his money. Go look up how Glenn Taylor has made his money. I don't know much about the Wilfs, but like behind any $5 billion fortune,
it's usually real estate or finance.
Let me put it this way. Yeah. Somebody with less money got squeezed so that these people could get more money. That's just kind of, how it works, basically. That's how every billionaire gets built. And I have issues with that. Absolutely. I've talked about it before. When I hear someone's a billionaire, my first thought is, ugh, basically. But if you're only choosing a potential owner from that pool, there has to be levels. You have to be grading on that curve to some extent. And you can decide for yourselves, obviously. And again, I'm not suggesting these are horrible people. But let's get into a little bit of what they do, how they made their money. So Matt, the younger brother, the richer brother, the basketball player, is the CEO of United Wholesale Mortgage, which is the country's largest home lender. And his father had a much smaller, localized version of that he sort of took over, I think, maybe 15, 20 years ago or something. And so, I don't want to call him a Nepo case, but like his dad paved the way. He took over and turned it into something massive. Right. I know Pablo Torre from formerly of ESPN, who now has a show, did a whole hour-plus show on YouTube about how the way he has built that business and the way he's built his fortune through that lending business is not great. It's not great for home buyers. It's not great for smaller lenders and all that. And so I think a lot of people who watch that go, oh, this guy I don't want to be involved in. I'm not saying it's good. I'm just saying it's got to be relative. Justin, the younger brother who is specifically interested in the Twins, is basically a private equity bro based out of Chicago. And he is, I think, the CEO of what's called Shore Capital Partners. And what he does, this is, again, I have $80 in my bank account. So take this with a grain of salt. I've read 4 profiles on them or whatever. So we'll see how much I understand. But my understanding is the way Justin built that company, private equity company, and made his $5 billion is that he's bought over the last 10, 20 years, like over 1,000 businesses for an average of like 10 million each. And I'm not saying those are small businesses, but they're small-ish in the private equity world. And most of them are, Midwest, kind of Ohio, Pittsburgh, Cleveland, Detroit, those type of places. Right. And what he has generally done, according to
flyover states.
Yeah, flyover states, let's call them. Sure. Rust Belt, is that the...
Yeah, kind of.
Sure, okay.
Sure.
But again, that's where they're from.
Right.
So,
okay.
And what he does basically is he buys them for like 10, 20 million, whatever. He injects immediate capital to sort of improve their technology, improve their processes, sometimes add to their headcount, streamline stuff. He really wants to modernize a lot of these businesses. And I know people are saying, well, what kind of business? Like, honestly, he's bought like veterinary clinics.
Yeah. Right.
He's bought like rehab facilities. Like, it's really an interesting kind of, here's a word I learned, portfolio of businesses. And so he immediately injects capital. He gets them running smoothly and obviously more profitably. And then what he does is similar businesses in their surrounding areas, he buys them up too and then uses those as expansion opportunities.
Sure.
So he buys a veterinary clinic that has 5 places, let's say in Pittsburgh, props it up, makes it much more profitable, makes it much bigger.
Gets the systems in place so that it looks right.
And then he goes and buys a handful of other small
customer bases and locations in various places. Right.
And basically folds those in, and then all of a sudden you have 10, 20, 30, and then he sells the entire operation, renamed, rebranded, whatever, for 5x what he paid for them. Now, I'm sure there are some tales from the people who've been bought by him or have dealt with him who are not going to be positive. Of course, yes. There are a lot of eggs broken when you're making those omelets of 5 billion, 15 billion, whatever. Sure. Like I said, he owns 22% of this. I spoke wrong. He only owns 15% of the Suns. He owns 22% of the mortgage.
Oh, I got you. Okay. All right.
Which is more valuable than the Suns. Yeah, the mortgage thing's worth a lot.
That still seems like a large percentage compared to what I understand most minority owners own in a sports franchise.
I think that like what I just attempted to describe, hopefully did it justice, of kind of how Justin buys companies, takes them over, props them up, expands with them. There's in a lot of ways, it made me think of the opportunities within the Twins to do that. Now, there's no, you can't buy the Twins and buy a second Twins or anything. Right. But I am certain, and we've talked about this, not so much on the field.
No.
And maybe not even in the front office.
Well, we talked about this as part of the Dave St. Peter leaving and Falvey taking over and so on. Like, we've definitely, what I feel like we have seen on the baseball side is similar streamlining and improvements. And what they hoped to gain by handing the business side over to Falvey is a similar revolution or reinvigoration of some of the processes that go on that side.
Aviation. But yeah, I mean, that's one of the things.
Asian we don't want to bring up. Anyway, keep going.
John's favorite Asian. Well, don't start. Oh, no. Don't start. No. But yeah, I agree with that. I mean, one of the we talked over the last several years, but certainly as this season and the Dave St. Peter situation came to a head, which is, you can say what you will about how effective the front office has been in terms of the on-field roster and the success of the team, but they have a winning record. They've made playoff appearances. They broke the 20-year playoff streak. I think certainly they've at least been
strong minor league system,
solid. Okay. Right. Now, people may disagree with that, but there's no doubt that, I mean, they took over one of the least modern front offices, both in terms of tech, but also just like head count.
Yep.
And they completely overhauled it to the point that like now there's dozens and dozens more people involved. And so the processes that are in place now weren't even, the seeds of that weren't even planted by the previous regime. And I'm sure if we were to talk to, and we had more knowledge of the business side of things, there are examples of similar things, but I think in general, my assumption is that the business side, whether it's TV deals, ticketing, just how they promote the team, there's tons of different like little offshoots.
You've already seen that a little bit over at the Suns and Mercury, especially with the Mercury, right? Where the Mercury ends up getting a new $100 million facility that's for a WNBA team that they're pumping a $100 million facility into. Right. And then on top of that, when the TV deals go south and they've got to come up with a new business plan for that. That business plan is let's think long term. And let's try and make our games available to everybody all the time, and see what happens. See what happens to our season ticket base when that happens.
Right. Because to a guy who has $15 billion, taking a $50 or $100 million loss for a couple of years, I'm sure he doesn't want to do it.
Sure.
But if you can build the fan base, and so what they did with the Suns, it was a very similar TV situation to the Twins, where their cable kind of that bubble collapsed for them.
Yeah.
And they could have done what the Twins did and taken a lesser deal and, continue to piss off the fans. Instead, they put it on over-the-air TV, like the local broadcast, and they literally did a program where you could sign up and they would send you an antenna in the air or, in the mail so that you could get over the air. And they got so many people interested in that, I read, that they had to restock the antennas multiple times.
They bought an antenna company.
Well, they should have done that.
Bought out the competing antenna company.
That'd be genius. But anyway, so
the biggest barrel producer, biggest barrel owner was in the late 1900s or early 1900s and late 1800s. It was Standard Oil.
Oh, yeah.
Standard Oil was like, you know what? We keep having to buy all these barrels. Why don't we just start making barrels?
That's
too?
Genius. I really should invest in a fried rice company. That's what I should invest in. It's my thought here that I just had. Anyway, you should invest in beer, which you're trying to do. Basically. So you were smart too. But so I guess my overall point on that is just trying to connect dots here to say what type of owners would specifically Justin be. The fact that he's made his billions taking over small-ish or medium-sized businesses in the business world and putting capital in and modernizing them and adding tech and streamlining the processes. I do think there's probably, if he's been poking around the Twins and if he conducts an internal audit and he really gets deep into the weeds of what I would be buying here, which would be the next step in this process, obviously. Right. I mean, you're not going to buy it without test driving it for a while.
He's going to be rubbing his hands together.
He's going to be saying, holy crap, I can do this, I can do that, I can do this.
The other thing about, just this philosophy is the most maddening thing about watching what the Pohlads did in 2024 in cutting back the salary wasn't just that they were setting a boundary on payroll. There's always a boundary on payroll for every team, every Major League Baseball team, right? It was that what they were doing was just so clearly bad business.
Right.
It was clearly not the way. When you are at the point where you are in the bonus round, you are in the postseason on a regular basis, and you are playing for generations worth of fans. You've got the championship you have built. You've been working your way this way for 10 or 12 years to get back to that, maybe 20 years. 20 years so that you won a postseason game.
That's when you get more aggressive, not dial back.
To dial back at that particular point isn't just cheap. It's bad business.
Yes.
That's exactly when you do invest in things.
This is something we talked about a lot, because we always hear there's this weird subset of people, and there's a lot of them with the Twins, which isn't as weird because they're motivated. It's their employer. But there's this weird subset of the fan base who are billionaire defenders. They've taken it upon themselves. And what we always hear is, well, they have to run it like a business. Right. What do you want from them? They have to run it like a business. They can't lose money. They have to run it like a business. I reject that in two ways. One, who says?
Right. Yeah, okay, right.
And two, okay.
Run like this is the dumbest possible thing you do.
They're running it well as a business? Right. There seems to be a weird assumption that if you just go, well, they're running them like a business. Everybody runs their business well? No, right. Definitely not.
That's right.
Somebody's the worst run business in baseball.
Yeah,
somebody's 29th, somebody's 28th, on and on and on.
And that's the one you want to buy.
Right. So that's, I think, beyond just the average Twins fan reads this or hears this or whatever is going to go, oh my God, maybe they'll add $50 million to the payroll right away and they'll be more aggressive and all that. That's great.
Right.
But there's also a longer term, bigger picture opportunity to increase the fan base, to increase, television market, all that stuff that I think these guys seem, if not more equipped, at least more interested in figuring it out, or more willing to kind of maybe take chances with that sort of thing. And so I just had a funny thought, So they need to be graded on like a billionaire scale or like a curve.
Right.
We need like OPS plus for goodness.
Okay.
Where it's like,
all right. But 100,
100's league average. So like me and John, I think are like 100.
Sure.
I'm putting me in there because I'm like an 85 and you're a 115.
Sure, that's about right. Yeah.
So together we're like 100. We're just average people. We're not good. We're not that great. We don't like, give millions to charity, but we're not bad guys. John especially, I'll blend myself in with him. But like a billionaire on an average scale is
like a catcher on the OPS plus.
Right. That's exactly right.
That's right.
They're the Christian Vasquez. You're like, man, this guy can't hit. It's like, well, for a catcher, he's like. Anyway, maybe I should write that. That should be my intro to the Ishbia brother.
I'm looking forward to this.
Really
to
funny.
you wrestling that thought to the ground.
First question at the press conference.
Right.
Where would you put your goodness plus at? They're like, what? Well, you guys are not good guys, but are you good relative to billionaire? They're like, have this guy killed, will you? That's going to drag down your goodness plus.
That's going to be really. Well,
anyway, so that's
be the first one
to attempt to kill me. Is that what you're saying? Yeah, we got some guys who got $50,000 trying to kill me. I'm looking at one of them right now. And so here's ultimately where this is at, though, and then we're going to move on to Correa and stuff. But I think two things are clear, just by virtue of this becoming public, their interest. One is they're going to sell this team, in my opinion. This is just me.
Well, I mean, at the very least, it seems like they were serious. Although,
I'm viewing it from the other side.
Okay.
At the very least, there's interest.
Well, that's true too.
Genuine interest for people who have the money and who have demonstrated the ability to buy franchises in other sports.
Yep.
I think if one or two brothers are interested in that, that tells me that they can sell this team. Now, who knows what the price tag will be, but if they, the estimated prices are ultimately similar to what their actual asking price is, I do believe they will sell the team. I do believe that they have not rebuffed interest, which tells me it wasn't just a smokescreen of, we'll sell the team. Get the fans off our back for a while or whatever.
Right.
But the other thing is, we just spent a very long time talking about this, and you can tell that I wouldn't say I'm excited, but it's extremely intriguing.
Sure.
We like new things.
Change is good.
Yes, in this circumstance. In my life, no. Don't.
No, Aaron's not a big fan of change, and he's excited about this change. I should tell you everything that you need to know.
Yes. Because here's when I get actually excited about change, and I hate change. But when I think it's right to immediately get excited about the possibility of change, and we talked about this when they just put the team up for sale, and it was just this nameless, faceless potential new buyer. And we talked about the same thing. What are the odds that the new guys are going to be worse?
Yeah, right.
And specifically now that we have a face and a name and a background and all this other stuff that we talked about, maybe these guys come in and just do something horrible, and maybe 5 years from now we're going, oh my God, we were so naive and all that. There's always a slim possibility of that.
Sure.
I'm not ruling that out. But what are the odds that these two dudes, if they bought the Twins, are going to have a lower ranking payroll, are going to invest less money into the team, the infrastructure, the roster, are going to be less aggressive with expanding the fan? I just have a very hard time believing it, both from a monetary standpoint, from a personality standpoint, everything I read and hear about these guys, and from a demonstrated examples of buying the Suns and the Mercury of what they've actually tried to do when they buy these teams. I think it's a very hard case to argue that they will be as or similar or less good than the Pohlads at those things.
Yeah.
And that in and of itself to me suggests that the change would be good. Now, with that said, they are not, by all accounts, not that far along in this process.
Right.
No offer has been made. It's possible that they get deeper into the weeds and they start looking at the details of this, and they're not interested.
We know that they're still trying to put together their ownership group. Right. And what's from the quotes Falvey made at the winter meetings about this, it's not totally clear the Twins feel like they even have their ducks in a row yet for the sale. Like it sounds like first step is Twins have to get everything buttoned up and figured out what they want, to be ready for the sale, and then we kind of get to the point where, because
you talked about how it's almost like running for office, although maybe this is not an apt comparison these days. But if you want to run for mayor,
right,
you better have your S together,
right.
Not just now, but when people start asking your high school classmates about you and all sorts of, people you dated and all this other stuff. And so you described kind of how they're being vetted and they're being audited and they're being to buy the Suns, and it would be the same thing for the Twins. Well, the flip side is also true. If you're the Ishbias or whoever, and you're going to try to buy this franchise for $1.7 billion or whatever it ends up being.
Yeah. You're going in there with a magnifying glass any place you can put one, right?
These dudes are coming with a clown car of lawyers making $2,000 an hour who are coming in and looking over everything with a fine-tooth comb like they are. And so the Twins need to get their stuff together from that standpoint too. And so I think the possibility of these specific people buying the team is intriguing and exciting. I wouldn't bet on it happening necessarily, but I also just think in general, even if they do end up buying the team, and even if this sale were to go through in what would be considered a rapid fashion, it's not like they're going to still have – it's going to be like January 20th and they're going to go, go sign the remaining free agents. Here's another $40 million.
Right.
This would be a sale that would probably go through, even in the kind of best case, most rapid scenario – opening day, early summer, that sort of thing. Like this is a next year sort of thing, my assumption is. But we should at least a month from now, let's say, have a fairly decent sense.
I mean, it'll be interesting to see what happens. Like we have one weekend in the off season every year where it's Twins weekend. You've got Twins Fest. You've got the Diamond Awards dinner. You've got stuff like that. It'll be interesting to see at that point.
Y'all are
we've got some news
to the Ishbia boys, man.
Speaking of which,
you're invited to the meltdown.
There will be a winter meltdown.
Yeah, I tried to talk John out of it, but
we have got a winter meltdown venue.
If you would like to see me limp around in person, this is your really one and only opportunity for the 2025. Probably.
Potentially,
unless you're in my living room, which is pretty rare. There's really only been like 9 people in there in 5 years.
Right, yeah.
Okay, before that's all on the Ishbias. Before we talk about Carlos Correa,
let's talk about some other stuff.
Also, juicy, speculative topic. Let's talk about our last couple of sponsors. One is Dan Hodgen.
Yeah, Dan Hodgen. So, I mean, it's the end of the year, Christmas we talked about, but it also means New Year's coming in. That is when a lot of people start thinking about buying a house, right? That's one of the big resolutions of 2025. Yeah. It's a great time to put your house on the market. It's a great time to start looking for a house that's on the market. And our recommendation for that is Dan Hodgen, who's a real estate consultant with eXp Realty in the Twin Cities. He's helped sell over 500 homes, 5-star service since 2001. That's about as long as we've both been blogging. Actually longer, right?
Yeah.
He started in 2002, 2001?
Here's what he offers that is unique, in addition to experience, expertise, all that stuff.
That's right.
When you sell a house in a like traditional structure, like a commission structure, it's like 3-point-something% on the selling side.
That's right.
And for, let's say, a $400,000 house, that would be over $12,000 that you have to give to the person who helped you sell it.
That's right.
He works on a flat $6,000 commission.
That's right.
Flat fee. And so you would save on a $400,000 house more than half.
Yeah, that's right. That's another $6,000 that goes into your pocket.
Yes. And doesn't charge broker administration commission to buyers or sellers. So that saves you another like $500, $1,000 or something like that. And he's telling people, don't just take these guaranteed offers.
Oh, please don't do that.
Where they can close in a day. There's a reason it's so easy, quote unquote, to do that. That's right. Is because you're not maximizing your profit.
Yeah, they're underselling what you could be.
He has created a special link, special website just for Gleeman and the Geek listeners. Go to Twins, which is his favorite team, 6K, the $6,000 flat fee, twins6k.com. That's twins, the number 6 and the letter K. Twins6k.com. You can search listings. You can see what your home is projected to be worth. Yeah. So check out Dan at twins6k.com. And are we going to play his jingle?
Yeah, we're gonna
play his jingle
to show how much he goes the extra mile.
Jingle.
Here it is. He made a special Gleeman of the Geek jingle. Here it is.
Call Dan Hodgen, he's your man. He'll sell your lodging for just $6,000. From western Wisconsin to the Twin Cities land. At twin6k.com, find Double and Dan. He'll give you his all for just $6,000. To find your dream home or sell yours today. Use your noggin, find Dan Hodgen at twin6k.com.
And our final sponsor, Factor. I am very, very, very excited that when I come back from Australia in a month, I'm going to have Factor sitting, waiting for me when I deliver. Because Factor is, as you are getting into this holiday place, as you're getting through the holiday time, and you are trying to find quick ways to eat, but also to eat healthy and good.
Yes.
Yeah. put down the chips? How about you order some Factor stuff and get some good meals that are tasty and super fast to make?
Chef prepared, dietitian approved. They got a large menu that you can choose from. It can be, maximum protein, or it can be veggie, or it can be for families. You can manage calories. Like, you can pick and choose each week what you want to focus on. And they're good. I mean, we've both tried them. They're super easy to heat up.
The butter chicken thing I think is outstanding. Like, I couldn't order enough of those, but they've also got things like loaded mashed potato pork chops and sweet potato and chickpea curry and Peruvian shrimp and red pepper cauli grits. Like,
all right.
This is...
Now I'm hungry.
Me too.
You go to factormeals.com/50Gleeman, like 50, and use the code 50Gleeman. And the reason you use the code 50Gleeman is because you get 50% off your first box, and they'll ship it to you for free.
Right.
That's 50Gleeman. 50Gleeman is the code at factormeals.com/50Gleeman to get 50% off your first box plus free shipping while your subscription is active. All right. Let's talk about Carlos Correa here. So, like I said, we went through kind of the reporting side of this with Dan on the Patreon, which I would recommend. It was a good show.
Yeah.
For Dan, certainly. By his standards. It's like the OPS scale.
Yeah, great.
It's a good Dan show.
That's right. Yeah, for Dan, it was a great
we
show.
kid.
Right.
At the end of the show, I joked about how I hadn't been mean to him and how difficult that was for me, but that I'm trying to turn over a new leaf. And then the past several days, I've been privy secondhand.
I heard about this.
To a group chat that I'm not involved in, but that my girlfriend is in with Dan and you and a couple of your dumb friends.
Giving him a hard time about his 49ers.
It's just a crap on Dan thread, basically. Like,
no, it's mostly 49ers.
Well, and I was like, man, you're going to cause this guy to break. And Becky was like, yeah, that's the goal.
Becky was told that we were bullying Dan.
Yeah, I
that
told
we were
her.
being mean.
Yeah.
We were being too mean to Dan.
Please. So anyway, if you'd like to hear Dan and judge for yourself whether he deserves to be bullied,
yes,
check out the Patreon. But we're going to talk about it more from our point of view. And this started, well, first of all, there didn't need to be an event to start this speculation.
No.
Because, and Dan talked about this from the, potential suitors angle. The baseball world has been aware of the Twins' monetary and payroll and ownership situation for a couple years now, basically 15 months, going back to last, when they essentially said, we had $160 million payroll, $165 million payroll 2 years ago. It's going to be much lower.
We know it should be 175, but still we're going to go to 130.
And then where it really kind of doubled down on that was where I tried to get Joe Pohlad in person to, say what the payroll is going to be. And he declined. But our understanding from Twin sources is that it's going to essentially remain stable, which means 130.
In other words, would be stagnant.
Sure. Yeah. And that sounds great. In the context of we're not going to lower it again, we're going to keep it the same.
Sure.
Except payrolls rise year over year across the league overall. That's it. And if you had $165 million payroll 2 years ago, you would be expected just from normal league-wide inflation of salaries.
It's like the Twins are trying to paint themselves as a distressed property.
Right. Staying, what did you call it, stagnant,
yes,
is falling further behind in the race.
Of course.
Like, you can say, I'm running just as fast, but if people are continually gaining speed, they're going to start passing you. Right. The baseball world can see that. They can see if this team has $130 million payroll for 2025 and Carlos Correa is making $35 million of it, and you got some other decent-sized salaries too, well, it's a no-brainer that teams are going to start making calls on the most expensive guys on teams that have a payroll crunch. And then it really kind of kicked off a month or so ago when Joel Sherman, who's a longtime reporter and columnist now for the New York Post, covering the Yankees and the Mets, he wrote speculative and opinion-based thing.
He said the same thing that we just said.
Where it was basically
he just said it in print.
Whoever misses out on Juan Soto between the two New York teams, here's an idea. Why don't they just go get Carlos Correa from the Twins?
Right.
His contract, relative to some of the contracts we're now seeing, Even someone like Willie Adames.
Yeah, we should talk about that contract.
A similar shortstop. He's a year younger than Correa. He's been healthier than Correa.
Yes.
But he's not as good, I would argue, as Carlos Correa, but he's damn good.
His career OPS plus is 109, and Carlos Correa's is like 124.
Right. He's coming off a good year and all that stuff. He's a year younger. I don't think he's as good defensively, but he's an all-star level shortstop.
Right.
Signed 7 years, 180 million with the Giants. Correa now has 4 years left at 128 million. So like 30 million a year for 4 years, 32 million a year for 4 years. That's a lot of money, and it's a lot of money for a team that has a $130 million payroll. However, for a team that, let's say, has a $230 million payroll, it's not that much money.
Right.
And relative to not only other shortstop contracts, I mean, we saw Trey Turner got $300 million from the Phillies. Guys like Adames, who are like kind of, I would say, second-tier shortstop, are getting almost $200 million for twice as long.
If you're a Detroit Tigers fan, the
Javi Baez.
Javi Baez contract doesn't
all of
look
a
so
sudden
great.
now 4 years and $128 million is not that huge of a contract for teams that aren't in the Twins' financial circumstances.
Sure.
And so the speculation
It's not an onerous contract. Oh my God, we've got to cover money to give it away, etc.
The Twins have turned it into a slightly onerous contract through their lack of spending, basically.
Sure.
And so that speculation was swirling a little bit, and it's really kind of gained momentum over the last several weeks, and then at the winter meetings.
In part because these free agents keep signing places,
Right.
and they're making A, the contract look better, and B, because some teams are sitting there without the free agent they wanted to get.
Right. And so Dan talked at the winter meetings in Dallas, which was last week, to Falvey and Zoll and Baldelli and various other people. He also talked to people from other teams, which we discussed on the Patreon side with him. And my takeaway from all that and reading, because Falvey talked about it.
Yeah.
He was quoted about it.
Well, that was part of what regenerated it.
Sure.
His quotes didn't really douse the fire
Right. He
around
didn't say unequivocally we would never trade Carlos Correa.
His quotes could be read anywhere from there's a 1% chance we end up trading Carlos Correa to we're open for business on Carlos Correa.
Right.
And he didn't really specify. And it could mean both of those things, just for what it's worth, right? So, but as a result, if you wanted to read it one way, you read it one way. If you wanted to read it the other way, you read it the other way, right?
And once, I'm not going to get into the same stupid analogy, although one person did tweet me and say this was a good analogy. I like to talk about the Overton window.
How many followers do you have?
6. So 1 out of 6. You shut up. That's all I need. I just need one encouraging word.
It's like the city of Bloomington follows you, something like that. You got what, 80,000 people, 80,000 followers.
It's shrinking.
Like that, and you got one.
Yeah, because we're making our way to Blue Sky, I think. So it's shrinking. But anyway, the Overton window, look up the Wikipedia. That's how I know about it, because I'm not that smart. But it's basically sometimes people say outlandish seeming things so that not because they think those outlandish seeming things will happen, but so that they can then take 2 steps back from the outlandish seeming thing, and then the 2 steps back seem reasonable by comparison. You're changing kind of the scope of what is seen as normal or acceptable or whatever. And so my analogy to what the Twins are doing is simply by not saying absolutely not, we're not trading Carlos Correa, you get the juices flowing for other teams.
Right.
Whether it's 1%, whether it's just we're taking calls on anybody, whatever. And you start to kind of, lay the groundwork for that being acceptable. And so I do think there's some of that either intentionally or unintentionally with what the Twins are doing. But bigger picture, this is just kind of how Falvey operates. Like, this is certainly the Falvey I've gotten to know over the last, 4 or 5 years. I think he's been pretty consistent over the years when someone says, whether it was Josh Donaldson, whether it was guys he didn't trade, like Byron Buxton, I remember before he signed the contract. There were rumors they were going to trade him. I think the Phillies made them a good offer for Byron Buxton. It's always been pretty consistent from Falvey, which was no one is untouchable. And that's the exact stance I would take, by the way. I've said that over the years on prospects a lot. If someone wants to call us on any player and they want to go through the process and try to figure something out and make us an offer or just try to get kind of the parameters of an offer, it would be stupid of us just to hang up just out of principle. maybe there's a 0.000% chance they're going to just make such an extraordinary offer for this thing that we would be morons to turn it down, and you don't get those offers unless you're at least open-minded and you answer the phone. That is my sense of how they're viewing the Correa situation largely. However, I do think, given how last season ended, given the payroll situation, given the ownership situation of wanting to have clean books potentially for a new owner, whether it's the Ishbias or someone else, I do think there's perhaps slightly more smoke. I think there is just
slightly more fire with this smoke.
Okay, yeah.
That's right. Yeah,
you can tell I haven't gone camping much. I watch Survivor sometimes. That's really
it's
all I got.
Wetwood.
Yeah. We always watch like some season of Survivor, and like the first 2 episodes, they're just trying in vain to start fires. And I'm always like, look at this loser. He can't even start a fire. Meanwhile, it's like, please, I couldn't start a fire. Anyway, my sense of it is, and I 100% would try to take this same approach were I in Falvey's shoes. If you're another team and you want to call me to express interest in anyone, from Carlos Correa to the worst guy in the team, to the Walker Jenkins in the farm system, whatever, Royce Lewis, whoever it is, John Bonus. Boy, we'll eat salary on that one. Ooh, boy, if we could attach draft picks.
That's right.
Anyway, I'll take the call. I'll listen to your pitch on it.
I mean, he's done it with Josh Donaldson just a couple years ago, right?
But it doesn't mean it. I mean, he's done it with Byron Buxton, and not only not traded him, but signed him to an extension. Correct. So there are multiple avenues that this can take. But at the very least, going back to that Overton window thing, it at least kind of, it doesn't confirm anything, but it kind of justifies some level of speculation because he's not shutting it down. Right. So now anybody who, whether they're Twins fans, they're Yankees fans, whatever, want to start speculating about it, they can at least point to Falvey's stance on it and say, well, it's not been ruled out. Like, we can speculate freely on it.
Right.
And so I think that's where they're at with Correa. The difficulty becomes, in my mind, they're not in a rebuilding phase. They haven't been.
The problem is you've got to come out ahead in terms of talent.
Right. Or
somehow there.
You either have to, like, the most.
Or you have to trade away salary that can help you become ahead of it.
The most natural way, or the most common way, a player like Correa with a multi-year contract like his gets traded is for prospects. It's they've been on it, let's say, a good team, and that team has fallen on hard times, on the field, off the field, whatever. They're going to go through a rebuilding phase. They're stripping down the roster for salaries and veterans and value and all that, and they're going to trade them for a bunch of double-A guys and try to rebuild. That's common, obviously. But I will note that Falvey has never done that in now 8 years with the team. He did it at mid-season trading for Joe Ryan.
Yeah, not during the offseason, you mean. Yes.
He has not gone into a season.
Nelson Cruz and Jose Barrios were those trades, right?
Mid-season because it was a disaster. And Nelson Cruz was a 40-year-old free agent to be, all that. But then beyond that, it's not that they couldn't decide that trading Carlos Correa for a really good group of prospects would make sense. I think there are certainly scenarios where that would make sense. But removing Carlos Correa from the team, he's their best player. Like, I mean, let's just say that. He's their best player. Right. There are health concerns, obviously, but he's clearly their best player. If you remove your best player and you trade him for entirely future value, that doesn't mean that it was a bad trade, but it certainly means your current team has gotten considerably worse. Right. And the rest of their roster does not blend well with a team that just got considerably worse. So then, to your point, you could trade him for prospects and then view the, let's say, maybe they have to eat some money, but let's say they clear 25, 30, maybe even 30-something million for this year, but for the next several years. The key would then be having some ability to then take that $30 million in savings or whatever it ends up being and quickly reinvest that in either free agents or to go trade for people who other teams are trying to dump their salaries.
But that is tricky to do.
That's really tricky to do. And I think in general, especially given what the prices have been in free agency this offseason.
Yeah, there's a reason that Carlos Correa's contract doesn't look so bad right now, is because the free agents are costing a lot. Also, a lot of them have the premier guys, the guys that have the kind of value that Correa has, have already signed with somebody. And then on top of that, you can't. Is it not a situation where trading $1 for 5 quarters makes sense, because the Twins already have so many of the holes kind of adequately covered at places that if you're going to try and make get a bunch of 3 WAR guys instead of the 6 WAR guy that you're trading away, Well, you already got 2.5 more guys in place.
True. Although if you were to remove the shortstop and put a different infielder at shortstop, that creates an opening. But I agree with all you're saying. There are like two ways this makes sense to me. One is to do what I just described, which is you trade Carlos Correa for a good prospect haul. You take that future value, you clear the money off the books, and then you immediately reinvest that money in free agency or trades. Now, the problem with that is in free agency, well, it's twofold. One, $30 million don't buy you what it used to buy you.
That's right.
And beyond that, they're not going to shed a guy's contract at $30 million and add another $30 million contract,
right,
like a Corbin Burns or something like that. What I'm certain they would attempt to do is take the $30 million and try to get 3 guys for $8 to $15 million each. Alex Cobb just signed for $15 million. I'm not saying he's a bad player, right, but I would say don't overestimate the short-term impact of what $30 million can buy spread over 2 or 3 free agents, let's say, or trade even. The other avenue that they could take is to trade Correa to another contending team for veteran players or player.
Right.
And
that's tricky too.
That's
hard to find.
That makes the most sense just like logically,
right,
because you're saying, well, we don't want to rebuild. So if we're going to trade our best player, we need another good or 2, whatever,
right,
players in return. The problem there is trying to find a fit.
Right.
We should talk about this with Max Kepler on a much smaller scale. It's like, well, the Twins don't want to just trade him for prospects. They want to trade him for like a pitcher.
Right.
Well, what team that wants Max Kepler as a short-term veteran is also have excess pitching that they're going to get rid of?
Yeah.
Say the same thing with
That's
Correa.
why it's so much easier to trade for prospects. Prospects can be used like currency.
They're like
right?
draft picks, basically, of baseball.
Well, yeah, or they are the dollar bills of the retail market, right? You don't go. It's harder to go and do a trade, than it is to just.
You're trading present for future. It's basically like the agreed upon, like you said, currency of baseball. When you then instead, if you were to try to trade present for present, like let's say you try to trade Carlos Correa for a pitcher who makes $20 million or something like that. What team that desperately wants Carlos Correa for 4 years, $128 million, which is almost by definition going to be a handful of teams at the top of the payroll,
wants to trade you their right-handed slugging outfield or first baseman,
their number 2 starter, whatever the circumstances are. And so both of those avenues that you could take, sort of get prospect value and reinvest the money, and then the other one being just trade him for 2 players who make that much, or a player who makes $10 million less but is still good. Those both have merit, and I think there are absolutely phone calls that the Twins could answer from both of those types of deals that would make sense to them. But the problem is kind of their end of it. How do you finish that in a way that is not debilitating to your team?
And we, by the way, we also left off the final barrier, which is Carlos Correa has a no trade clause.
Right.
Now it is kind of thought that he's going to want to be like, if the Twins make it perfectly clear they're just not going to compete. But the fact that they now have an ownership coming in there, like or a potential owner coming in that looks like they are very interested.
But what if he
competing.
hates the Phoenix Suns? So, yeah, I mean,
you think the Ishbias have just checked in, like, hey, Carlos Correa want to have a dinner sometime?
I mean, they might know him.
They
Who
might
knows?
have coffee, right?
Rich people know each other. You know what I mean? Like, but yeah, I mean, every indication, publicly and privately, is that Correa has not asked out, is generally happy here, enjoys it here, his family likes it here. I mean, they don't live here year round, so it's like a little bit a moot point.
Sure.
He's not asking out. Like, if you talk to him, he doesn't ask out. Behind the scenes, nobody has said, Carlos is really unhappy here.
Right.
But it's like,
we also know he wants to win a championship.
There's that component.
And he's seeing what they do as opposed to what they say.
Right. And if he sees, think of it this way. If it wasn't him being traded, if it was like, if they had 2 Carlos Correas.
Right.
Carlos Correa and Bill Correa. Okay. And they were going to trade Bill Correa, who's their second best player, makes $30 million a year. It would make sense that Carlos Correa would look at that and go, well, maybe I don't want to be here either. That's the mentality. And beyond that, you could also just say, if they want to trade me, I'll be traded. Right. Like, why do I want to stay at a place that wants to trade me? And so, yes.
Especially because there's plenty of opportunities as well for the new team to sweeten the deal a little bit. He's got a whole bunch of team options, playable team options.
That you could add a 5th year at $25 million or something like that. Right. So I think, yes, there's the no trade clause, and that's relevant in the sense that he has not asked out. That would be a whole different scenario. And maybe that could happen eventually. Who knows? But I do think it's a little overblown in the sense that you rarely see a guy, first of all, he's only been here 3 years. It's not like he's been here 12 years or something like that. But you rarely see a team go, we'd like to trade this guy. And the guy go, no, absolutely not. I'm just going to sink or swim with this team that wants me gone. So it's relevant, but only up to a point, I guess I would say. I'm trying to think of anything else. So, yeah, I have no problem with the stance they've taken. I mean, you can, haggle over the specific quotes and stuff and if those are good. But, I do like that they're speaking relatively honestly or at least publicly about this sort of thing.
In general, what you've seen from Falvey is he doesn't go out of his way to posture. He tries to be fairly candid in a lot of his replies. No, he's going to spin it the way he wants to spin.
There's a corporate speak involved, but generally speaking, yeah.
And when I read those quotes, and I think when we talked to Dan specifically, his initial reaction was, I think Falvey's just being honest here.
Right.
Like he's trying to lay out and be candid about the fact that people can be traded, as opposed to no. He's hinting to everybody to come open up the.
He wasn't hinting at everything. I think he was saying we get calls and I think if he would have taken the opposite stance of not commenting or whatever, it goes back to what we were saying is this is not a secret in the baseball world.
Sure,
that the team's payroll is way down and they got one dude who's making a whole bunch of money.
Right.
To act as if that's not the reality and to act as if that's not readily apparent to anyone who spends 1 second looking at your roster, I think would be disingenuous to the point that it's well, this guy's even full of it, and that makes me think something else is going on here. So I think, and then Dan talked to Baldelli, and Baldelli's stance was from a manager's perspective. And he was like, I don't want him to trade Carlos. He's our best player.
Right, yeah.
I love Carlos.
Right.
He's a great player. He plays a great shortstop. He's awesome in the clubhouse. He's a great dude. Why would we want to trade him?
Right.
And it's well, yeah, that is what Baldelli's overall stance on Carlos Correa is.
That's right.
He loves Carlos Correa. I mean, yeah, if you're a manager and they said you can have the best player on your team, you'd go, I'll take Correa. Now, you'd want Correa with better feet. But in general.
Right. That's it.
And so I don't know that there's much to read into that either. I mean, if you ask Baldelli about Carlos Correa, he's going to say this guy's, sketched by God himself. You know what I mean? There's also one other. Hold on, there was one other thing. Oh, we also talked to Dan then about, because he certainly reported on all this stuff because it would be doing a disservice to your audience if you weren't. But he certainly tried to downplay in the moment and then on the podcast this might be a 2% thing.
Right. We don't really know what percentage chance there is.
It's not been ruled out, but it's not something they're actively doing. A month from now, maybe we'll feel well, yeah, of course it was leading to this point. Or we might show up at spring training and there's Carlos Correa and you go, yeah, they were never going to trade Carlos Correa, whatever. But I think Dan has not doubled down, but it's clarified also they are going to make some trades. And it's the same 2 or maybe 3 names that we have been hammering on every single podcast with every guest, which is Chris Paddock, Christian Vasquez, and maybe Willie Castro.
Right.
Together, that's $24 million worth of salary. One of them is your 5th or 6th starter. One of them is your backup catcher, and one of them is your utility guy. All 3, if they had a $250 million payroll, we wouldn't even be talking about it. We'd be great, they got extra
or even
depth.
170 million.
Right. But
160.
Given the circumstances, they make $24 million. You're talking about them similar in terms of money as Correa making $32 million or whatever. And they are certainly, because it's 3 pieces, but also they're non-essential players. I mean, Willie Castro is much more essential than Vasquez or Paddock, but they're not Carlos Correa. But the problem with those 3 guys, what are you getting back for?
Right. You're not getting anything back.
And if you're only
not
getting...
much. Maybe Willie Castro.
Maybe.
Yeah.
But it doesn't seem like there's a... And I like Willie Castro. I would trade for him. He's making $6 million. But if I were another team, I'm not going to give you a top 100 prospect for Willie Castro or something like that. And the problem,
and even then, if you're getting a prospect of any sort, you're not making yourself better for next year.
And the real problem, as it relates to the kind of avenues we talked about with Correa, is if you trade 1 or 2 of those 3 guys, let's say, or even all 3, if you trade Chris Paddock, he's going to make $7.5 million. Right now, he's your 5th starter, but you have David Festa as kind of your 6th. He could just jump right in.
Sure.
I don't even know that makes the team worse. It eliminates depth, which could in turn make the team worse. But just as an on-paper opening day team, I don't know that replacing Paddock with Festa. I want to see Festa. I'm convinced Festa is good.
Sure.
So I don't know that it makes the team worse. But here's the issue. A, you're not going to get anything of substance for Chris Paddock. You might get some low-level prospect or something.
And you might not have to eat any salary.
Right. But if you clear even $7 million, it's not like you then have $7 million to go sign something.
Right.
Then you've gotten closer to the $130 million cap.
We think, right.
Right. But they're at like 140 now.
Right.
They need to trade Vasquez and or Paddock just to kind of get $3 million under so they can go sign some right-handed hitting outfield, Randall Grichuk or something like that. You know what I mean?
Yes.
And so it's much different than Correa in terms of the value they would bring in from a player standpoint, but also the value they would bring in from a monetary flexibility standpoint. Yep. But they're not going to enter the season with the payroll as high as it is now. So something's going to change, and there aren't that many ways to change that don't involve Correa, Lopez, or more likely Paddock, Vasquez, etc. Let's real quick talk about Rule 5. Eiberson Castellano. It's the first Rule 5 selection the Twins have made since the winter of 2017, the 2018 season, which was Tyler Kinley, who stuck around for a while. Actually has had a pretty good career post leaving the Twins. Yeah. That in and of itself, I think, is noteworthy. That 7 years of not picking and they decided to pick this dude tells you they actually like this guy and they think he has a chance to stick. Yeah. A couple intriguing things about him. I was vaguely aware of him just as sort of like a name I had heard, but I didn't know much about him. So I had to ask around with the Twins, with other teams. Heard some interesting stuff about him. One that stands out is he was 2 months ago, he was named the Phillies minor league pitcher of the year. Right. Now, that sounds like it means a lot. Right. But the Twins have had some minor league pitchers of the year, Steven Gonsalves,
that doesn't
Anthony
mean,
Slamma.
That doesn't mean that's their best prospect. It just means they had a very good year.
Now, it tends to...
Or a really good jump-up year.
It tends to swing more towards prospect as opposed to just like a AAA guy who's 30 and had a good year. Right. But sometimes you just don't have that many good I mean, the Twins have had on the hitting and pitching side, if you go back, look at the last 10 years, they've had plenty of guys who won player or pitcher of the year, and you go, yeah, I mean, who cares? So it doesn't mean that much, but you would think a 23-year-old single A and double A guy last year who put up really good numbers, improved his control tremendously, has a mid-90s fastball, is generally viewed as a decent prospect. If in September you name him your minor league pitcher of the year, you would expect to protect him with a 40-man roster spot in November. They didn't, and the thing I was able to learn...
They didn't, and nobody else chose him in front of the Twins.
Yeah, although there was only 7 picks made in front of the Twins. But yeah.
But there were 14 opportunities or something, or 12 opportunities in front of the Twins.
What really was interesting to me, though, learning is the Twins attempted to trade for him, perhaps multiple times, but I can tell you for certain, just before the deadline to add players to protect them, which was in mid-November. And that's not uncommon. Teams will kind of make known the on-the-fence guys. Like, we might add this guy to our 40-man roster, but if you want to give us something for him and add him to your 40-man roster to protect him, you can go ahead and do that. The Twins attempted to trade for him in November. It's possible they tried to trade for him going back a year or whatever. But I can tell you they tried to trade for Castellano in November, could not come to terms because the Phillies basically said, you're not offering us enough value versus the proposition of we'll just play chicken with you and we don't think you'll take him. Or if you do take him, you won't keep him on your major league roster all season. So it costs $100,000 to take a guy in the Rule 5 draft. You then have to keep them on the major league roster or the injured list for the entire season. At any point you try to take them off the major league roster, you have to offer them back to the original team for $50,000.
And that, by the way, one of the pieces the Phillies have multiple leverage when that's trade. The question is, why wouldn't the Phillies have made that trade as opposed to lose them this way? There's lots of ways. First of all, the one that you said, which is A, you can play chicken. Right. B is, well, no, we've got additional leverage because he might not be available when you get him Twins. Like if you want him, this is the time.
Although that doesn't help them.
But it doesn't help them. But it's a additional piece of leverage. And then the third one is that Yeah, you can take him, but then you're going to have to put him in a relief role at the major league level for a full year. You're going to basically lose a year development from this guy. Whereas if we trade him to you, you've got the freedom to keep him at Double-A, let him do his normal thing. So give us something good for it. Well, the Twins didn't, but they ended up getting him they ended up going past the chicken and getting past the second thing, which is no other team before them picked him as well. And now they've got him, and now it's a question of whether or not they can find a role for him in a bullpen. And it's tricky for competitive teams. Teams that are going to be crummy anyways and knows they're going to be crummy are often more invested in Rule 5 draft picks than teams that are competing for divisions.
They're using guys like that anyway a lot of the times. AAA guys, AA guys are on the team because they don't have talent.
And why didn't the Phillies add him to the 40-man roster? Well, I mean, they're kind of gambling that teams who look at this player are going to be like, it's hard to keep him on a – I mean, it is. How many guys do we have each year probably? Like 4 or 5 guys or 3 or 4 of Rule 5 picks who actually make it all the way to the end of the year on somebody's roster league-wide?
Yeah, it's shrunk recently. I think it's usually like half dozen at most.
At most.
Right? I mean, we're only at the point now where only like 10 or 12 guys get picked because they've changed the structure of the Rule 5. But yeah, I mean, it's very common for a guy selected in the Rule 5, and this is a very real possibility with Castellano and the Twins, to not even be on the opening day roster, to be offered back before that.
Correct.
And then even when they do make the opening day roster, which is the first hurdle you have to clear, like we talked about Tyler Kinley in 2018, they pitch horribly for 15 innings, or they just can't find regular work for them. Right. And they just go, you know what, just offer them back. Now, there is another possibility, which the Twins actually did with Scott Diamond and the Braves in the Rule 5 10 years ago or something. Maybe more than that.
You get to the point where you show that you're really serious.
And then, like, you draft him in the Rule 5.
You approach the Phillies again.
You bring him to camp or whatever, and then you say, we're going to keep this guy. Like, just so you know, we'll keep him, and we'll put him in long relief, and we'll let him get his brains knocked in for a whole season. If we're willing to do that to retain this guy who we like long term. But now that you know that we're just going to keep him, what if we send you something and then you clear us to send him to the minors?
The leverage situation changes, right? Because you've already used up the first one. You've already used up the second one. Now it's just a matter of, we don't really know if we want to keep this guy on the roster the whole year, or we don't want to affect his development. So we'll give you a little bit more than we were willing to give you before. Right. So we do that.
When the Twins did that with Scott Diamond, I remember being furious at the time. This must have been 2010-ish, something like that. They traded a recent second-round pick, a hard-throwing reliever out of the University of Florida named Billy Bullock.
I remember Billy Bullock.
With huge strikeout numbers, and I'm like, really? For this soft-tossing lefty? Scott Diamond basically had one good season and then was pretty bad, but he was largely, I guess, overall a successful Rule 5 pick. Yeah. Billy Bullock flamed out and never even made the majors.
Right. Well, I mean,
so that's a possibility with the Twins. There are all sorts of possibilities here. One is they get to camp. I mean, you're really paying $50,000 to take a in-person closer look, a hands-on look at a player in camp. They're going to get to look at him. They're going to get to talk to him. They're going to get to have him tweak his pitches. They're going to watch him throw bullpens. They're going to get him in competitive games. For $50,000 to sort of get an eagle-eye view from a scouting standpoint, that's not that much to pay for that.
Right.
They may come to the determination he's not ready for the majors. He's not as promising as we hoped. We don't like him. His feet smell. Who knows?
Yes,
whatever it is.
That's right.
Let's just send him back in the middle of camp or before opening day.
Right.
There's also a possibility that they work out, like we just described, a trade where they send something to the Phillies. The Phillies then kind of uncheck the Rule 5 box, and the Twins can just send him to Double-A and have him develop normally. I would like to see that.
I would too.
That's probably the best for his future, although it's not the best financially for him, because if he stays in the majors, he's going to make $800,000.
That's exactly right. Yeah,
and get a year of service time. Yeah. The other possibilities are he makes the opening day roster, and a month in, they go, this ain't tenable. Let's send him back. The final possibility is he makes the opening day roster. They most likely put him in like a long relief, low leverage, multi-inning role, similar to what they did with Johan Santana back in the day.
Right.
They try to get him, 30 appearances for 2 or 3 innings an appearance. That gets you 60, 80 innings.
They have to get back past a couple of roster crunches that happen around some different points during the season.
I've seen a lot of people kind of trying to play the bullpen out towards opening day and saying, where's the room for him?
Right. Well,
here's what I'll say about that. Yes, they have.
It is a crowded bullpen.
Right.
Let's be fair.
It's a crowded theoretic theoretical
theoretically crowded bullpen.
It
correct.
won't be that crowded. I mean, let's just be honest. Like, by retaining Topa and Tonkin and Stewart was always going to be retained. But Toka, Tonkin, I'm
talking of injuries and availability on opening day. Right.
You gave all three of those guys arbitration contracts for roughly $1 million each. That then gives you 7 right-handed relievers under contract for 2025. Well, you're going to have an 8-man bullpen. You would think they're going to have one lefty in the bullpen, one way or the other. Well, you go, if there's one lefty and there's 7 righties, that's your bullpen. Right. Where does Castellano, who is not one of the 7, fit?
Or Varland, who's also not one of the 7.
Varland is also not one of the 7, which I would like to see Varland get a shot.
Right.
But if we're being realistic, there's 2 things to note here. One is Topa pitched like 3 innings last year in September, missed the whole year with a knee injury.
Right.
Stewart had shoulder surgery in the middle of the season, and they don't even know if he's going to be ready for opening day. That's 2 spots that I'll be shocked if, the over-under on both those guys being in on the opening day roster is like 1.1. Right. You know what I mean?
Right. That's right.
And so it's very likely that in our mind, the 7 righties are really going to be 5 or 6 righties, which creates an opportunity for Castellano. And then think of last spring. Topa got hurt last spring. Right. Guys get hurt. If you have a group of a dozen pitchers and you have them throw for 6 weeks, one of them's going to get hurt. I think you're thinking too far ahead if you're trying to lock in a bullpen.
Yeah.
And I get it. They have guys under contract, but also these contracts are pretty small.
That's right.
Like Michael Tonkin is making $1 million. That's the minimum salary.
I mean, if everybody was healthy, Tonkin could easily be the odd guy out there.
Yes, and they send him they pass him through waivers and they send him to AAA, or he gets claimed on waivers and they go, all right, no harm, no foul.
That's right.
Here's the other thing I'll say, and then we'll shut up about this. It's a role that you would not like a 23-year-old guy with 8 starts at AA to fill, but in general, it's a role that the Twins have expressed a desire to have every year, which is a multi-inning, long relief guy who can eat innings in games that are out of hand.
Right. When
a starter gets knocked out in the 3rd inning, so that they don't have to use their entire bullpen 1 inning at a time. They can just have it's a role that they tried to put Dobnik in, Winder in. They've tried a ton of guys.
A carousel of guys at times.
It doesn't always work. But
Rocco has opined about this for years.
Right? Most teams, they want that.
That's right.
But it's harder. It's much easier in theory than in practice.
Right.
Because in practice, when the S hits the fan and the fighting starts, you want your best arms in the bullpen. It's harder to kind of partition off one guy and go, this guy's not really part of the normal flow of the bullpen.
I'll tell you where the first crunch is going to happen. The first crunch or where this really ends up falling down a lot of the time. He goes out and he does do the multi-inning role one of these times. He goes and throws 48 pitches. Well, now he's not available the next day. Right. And and a lot of times when you use the guy to throw 48 pitches, you also had to use 3 of the other guys to use 20 pitches because you got your starter knocked out in the 2nd inning. Well, this guy did a great job of eating 3 innings, but there were 4 other innings to go through. And you're looking at the next day and you're like, we need what happens if this happens again? Right. We need a long inning guy.
We've joked about how the better you do as a pitcher in a long relief role, the more likely you are to be demoted to the minors the next day. Because if you play poorly and you only throw 25 pitches, you might stick around because you're still a fresh arm. But if you pitch really well and you throw 4 innings and you throw 60 pitches, well, you're going to be unavailable for 3 or 4 days. They're going to want a fresh arm. You can't do that with Rule 5.
Yeah, so you either need, when that happens, you either need to have 2 guys who are long inning guys, one of which has not been used. So you've got him available for the next day. Otherwise, you feel like you're vulnerable. Or you need to be able to swap that guy down to the AAA, bring up another guy from AAA, and he's your new long inning available guy there. And it'll be interesting to see how they handle that with a guy like this because they can't swap him out.
Yes.
So they've got to there's got to be somebody else you can either swap out, right, to that be available, whether that person is Tonkin or somebody else, or they have to be able to, have another person who can be available for long inning stuff as well on that team.
But I agree with all that, and I think that is
that's where it will be interesting to see how they handle that situation because that situation is going to come up.
Right. I agree, and I even quoted Jeremy Zoll in my article about him the night of the draft or whatever, basically talking about why that makes carrying a Rule 5 guy difficult.
Right, that's right.
But here's what I'll say. They have rarely had, setting aside his ability and lack of experience and him specifically, but they have rarely had a true starting pitcher.
Well, that's
like
true.
A current, guys like Winder who started 4 years ago, guys like whoever, they have rarely had a true strong, healthy starting pitcher in that long relief role. And so while I agree with you that throwing multiple innings in the Twins bullpen, if you're not a high leverage guy, and they don't throw multiple innings anyway,
right?
Throwing 2 or 3 innings in the Twins bullpen usually gets you a ride to St. Paul.
Right.
It's they swap you out.
Right.
But
get you a green line ticket.
Sure. Yeah. You can walk.
That's right.
Make them walk. Carry his bag and everything. But they've rarely had a true starting pitcher in that role, which I think means a couple things. One is you would hope that if he throws like 40 pitches, he might be available 2 days later instead of 4 days later.
Yeah, maybe.
But then the bigger thing to me, what I would be attempting to do with him is let him truly eat the rest of the game, as opposed to what you described they've often done. Like, let's say a starter leaves after 3 1/3. They'll bring in a long, quote-unquote long reliever to get you to like the 6th. And then no matter what the game state is, because a lot of those long relievers are not actually starters, they're like ex-starters. They're stretched out, but they're not fully. Then they'll go and use 2 or 3, quote-unquote, one-inning normal relievers to finish the game. Well, if instead you took your starter out after 3 1/3 and you bring Castellano in and you told him, Godspeed, brother, you're finishing this game one way or the other. Now, look, if he gives up 100 runs, you're going to take him out.
Sure.
But I think that would potentially alleviate a little of the problem because you're using him up even more, which, yes, then he's going to be unavailable for 4 or 5 days, which presents a difficulty. But if he keeps you from having to exhaust more than like one of your 1-inning guys, then you still have in your mind kind of a full assortment of actual relievers. Yeah. Now, if you get blown out 2 times in 3 games, you're going to be screwed no matter what. And then you have some problems there from that standpoint. But I do think his ability to eat innings is probably a little stronger theoretically than a lot of the guys they've used in that role. And if we're being honest, about half the time they haven't even had a guy in that role.
I'll be interested to see. Actually, I'm trying to find this out in spring training. Like, how do you prep a guy for that role? Though, like for a starting pitcher, you got to prep going like this guy's preparing to throw 80 inches. Like he's doing warm up exercises. He's got a 3-day program. He's got the bullpen up.
You said inches.
Oh, what did I say?
Throwing 80 inches is a whole. Oh boy,
it's very short. It barely makes it to the plate. Doesn't nowhere near the plate.
No, I had a whole different.
Off the mound.
My brain went a whole different way. Okay, go ahead.
How do you prepare? You've got the bullpen. You've got a starting pitcher who's going to throw 80 to 100 pitches is going through a routine, and they know they're going to start that day and throw 80. How do you prepare a starting? Yeah, you're a starting pitching arm. We get it. But you haven't thrown in 7 days because we haven't had a long one here. And now you've got to jump in and throw 60 pitches. Like, what are you doing to prepare
they ran into this.
So that on nights 4, 5, 6, and 7, you're available to throw, each of those days you're available to throw 60 or 70 pitches even though you haven't.
They ran into this with Randy Dobnik 4 years ago, I want to say.
Which is the example to kind of what you were talking about. Like, this guy was a starting pitcher.
And he began the season, I think, or very early on, was in the long relief role. But they played a bunch of close games in April. A bunch of low scoring, bad weather, all that. No starters left early. There was no blowouts.
And it was like 10 days and he wasn't being used, right?
And so they're like, well, we're not doing him any favors and we're not even really utilizing that bullpen spot, so let's send him to AAA.
But the point is that he didn't have to stay on the roster for the entire year to be able to get to his rights. Like, so he was always available to be sent down.
Now, the final thing is somebody might be listening to this and they might go, what the hell's the point of this? Like, why jump through all these hoops and do all this stuff? And that's fair. The vast majority of Rule 5 picks, half of them are returned to the team before anything happens.
Right, that's right.
And then probably half of those that aren't are eventually either returned to the team or just nothing ever comes of them. That's happened in Twins history too.
Sure.
But you can also point to, with the Twins have hit some real home runs with the Rule 5. Johan Santana being the biggest one. They worked out a pre-draft deal with the Marlins where they traded Jared Camp for him. Right. He became the best pitcher, in my opinion, in franchise history. Should have been a 3-time Cy Young winner, borderline Hall of Famer. That's as good as you're ever going to do in the Rule 5 draft. Right. They also have, Shane Mack, who was a great player for about 5 years for them, underrated in my opinion, should be a Twins Hall of Famer. Ryan Presley.
On the ballot this year, by the way.
Yes, I voted for him.
Okay, but he's also on the. So the fans have a ballot. I should just mention. You vote by tomorrow, Tuesday night. You can.
I think the fans collectively get like a vote. Basically, like
something
there's a pool of voters, and then the fans.
If you want a full if you want to get the link and also see a full list of the candidates and a discussion about them, we've got a story on the pitchers and a story on the hitters on Twins Daily.
I vote for Shane Mack every year. I've had a ballot, and I proselytize. Is that the right word?
Evangelize. How about that?
Evangelize.
Proselytize, I think, is also the same thing, but
it's harder to say.
I need to double check that definition.
Well, you're the one who knows the religious stuff, right? For Shane Mack. Not quite to the level that Royce did for Cesar Tovar.
Right. That's right.
Similar. He was great. Ryan Presley was a Rule 5 pick.
Yeah.
Scott Diamond, who we talked about, was a decent pitcher. I mean, they've had a handful of guys, including some real home runs. And most teams have 2 or 3 guys that have worked out well. Most of the time, this entire discussion is going to have been pointless.
Sure, yeah. That's right.
We
talk about it because we're baseball nerds.
Yes.
And this is what we do during the offseason. If you don't like it, don't subscribe.
Well, don't. But here's what I'll say about Eiberson Castellano specifically. This isn't some soft-tossing, AAA lifer type of guy.
Right.
He's 23 years old. Whether or not you want to put weight into him winning Phillies minor league pitcher of the year, he did win it. Legit mid-90s fastball up to like 96, 97. A pretty good breaking ball and a pretty good changeup. And talking to some Twins folks, they definitely think there are opportunities to take that 3-pitch mix and focus on the 2 off-speed pitches and change a little bit of the pitch characteristics or how he approaches it and have a little bit of a breakthrough on that front. Like they think in terms of being moldable clay, it's good stuff and the makings of a good 3-pitch mix. And because they've been able to study the data on these guys. So they really have zeroed in on him. Like we can change the changeup a little bit. We can change the breaking ball a little bit. I mean, we'll see. They've thought that of guys in the past.
A borderline top 10 prospect in the Phillies organization.
Yeah, they don't have a good.
They don't have a great one, but still, he's a borderline top 10 prospect.
I was asked
to get something like that for nothing is something,
right? I mean, it's a talent acquisition play basically. And I was asked where will he rank on my top 40 Twins list, which is coming out in 2 weeks. Somewhere I need to talk to a few more people about him, but somewhere in the 15 to 20 range probably for the Twins. And that's not a great prospect or anything, but that's not someone you wouldn't be willing to do some things to keep. And so I do think if they can get him healthy, he's had some back problems, and they can, like you described, figure out a way to make this role work to some extent. I do think there's the potential here. I'm not going to cite Johan every time for any pitcher you take, but to have a guy spend a year in a long relief role, which is a role they've needed,
right?
And if he can pitch reasonably effectively, have a 5 ERA or 5.5 ERA, and throw strikes, you get him once a week, a 2 or 3 inning outing at the very least. You also work with him in bullpen sessions, and they can do coaching behind the scenes. If you can get him 60 to 80 innings of low leverage work, and you can get to the end of the season and keep him healthy and make him at least feel like he's a contributor to the team, that he wasn't just sitting on his ass in the bullpen all year. At the end of that year, you send him to AAA for the next season. You have him resume starting. He's still, by the way, only 24 years old.
Right.
I do think there's an opportunity that he becomes, a number 4 starter for them or something like that. And it's probably worth the juice is worth the squeeze?
That's right. That's right.
I like how now I've gotten so old that I've forgotten key elements of any phrasing. So I have to say to you, was that right?
Well, and I like that you asked the older person if he's got it, if you got it right.
Yeah.
The one with the worst memory.
We need to recruit. We need a Rule 5 pick is what we need. We need to bring someone into this bullpen and have him throw some long relief for us.
That is correct.
So that's Eiberson Castellano. That's it. We can stop talking. I got other stuff to talk about, but that's plenty.
We'll be back in a couple weeks, probably after New Year's, with a free show.
Yeah, certainly if the Twins do something,
right,
anything, really.
We'll be covering it, but it'll be on the Patreon.
It'll be on the Patreon side, which is Patreon, patreon.com/Gleeman. It's $1 an episode.
Right.
We don't put out a ton during the off season. The ones we do put out during the offseason are either going to be guests that you probably want to hear or reacting to trades and signings that you definitely want to hear.
Sign up now. A, there's no ads in any of them as well. And also, B, you get the back catalog. So if you want to go listen to see what Dan Hayes had to say about what it was like to go through the Carlos Correa thing or interview with Betsy Helfand or anything like that. We do, however, have ads on this one, so we want to thank those sponsors. We've got Factor, Dan Hodgen and his jingle, Storyworth, and then a special thank you to our presenting sponsor, Black Stack Brewing, now being distributed to all of Greater Minnesota. You just stop by your favorite liquor store or the Black Stack Tap Room, say hi to Cooper, the owner, grab your favorite brew, or try something new.
We'll be back, whenever the bat signal goes up.
When we are needed.
Go to patreon.com/Gleeman and be ready.
Have happy holidays, have a happy new year, and we'll talk to you next 2025.
Gleeman